Middle East Center. And lastly, we'll be joined by Abdullah Varashia, co-founder and partner at leading emerging market consultancy. Later, we will be joined by Mr. Raymond Lowe, a veteran South African journalist and the deputy chairperson of MISA South Africa. Remember, you can call us to give us insight on the stories that you think deserve to be covered by the media. But of course, we omitted on the following numbers: +2711 714 6847, 714 6843, and 714 6857. Share your views and comments on Twitter at SA Media Monitor and like our Facebook page, Media Monitor. Very good morning to you. All right, now, as per history panel, a very good morning to you and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Morning, Alicia.
Now, panel,
morning,
as history, we want to look into today's newspaper headlines before we delve into our issues today. What's tickling your fancy today, Mello?
For me, I think the story that I'm finding very much interesting is the Oscar Pistorius story. I mean, part of the debate that has emerged out of that story is that people are asking whether or not Oscar should be going to nightclubs and those type of venues while he's still going through a trial. And then one of the issues, well, there's two issues. The one issue is the legal issue, whether Oscar is permitted. I mean, it's not like Oscar is under house arrest, therefore he may not be doing other things. So the question that people are asking now is that in good taste for him to be going to such venues. And people are saying that we are presuming that he's guilty. That's why we are saying that it's in bad taste for him to be going to those venues. But I don't think that one necessarily needs to make a presumption of guilt or innocence in order for one to make a finding of bad taste. The reason for that is precisely because it's common cause that Oscar killed Riva. Nobody's disputing that the prosecution has affirmed it, the defense has affirmed it, that Oscar's killed him. What Oscar's under trial for is the intent of the killing, whether the intent was accidental, whether it was murderous. That is what he's under trial for. So for me, I think on the basis of the fact that he's killed somebody, there should be a certain level of cognizance in his actions, and he should be very reflective, I suppose, before he actually goes out into certain venues, such that he's very sensitive to people's views and feelings.
Thank you very much, Mello. Ben, what do you think of today's newspaper headlines?
Okay, so I want to focus on the Gaza turmoil, and I think this is a tragedy for both sides. The picture here shows a child running, and of course, there are journalists focusing on the tragedy of the civilians. There are civilians on both sides that are suffering. And what is really, what the people should be focusing on is the fanatical, genocidal Hamas regime that has basically brought this about. Israel does not want this war. Nobody wants the war. The Palestinian people don't want the war either. And Hamas, basically, you cannot talk sense into them. They've had 3 opportunities to heed a ceasefire. There was a humanitarian ceasefire just 2 days ago. And during that humanitarian ceasefire, more than 20 rockets were fired into Israel. Israel has an obligation to defend its citizens, and that is what it is doing. It doesn't want war. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's how we end our headlines for today. In our top story today, millions of people across the globe celebrated the legacy of South Africa's first democratic president, Nelson Mandela, on Friday by volunteering 67 minutes of their time serving others. It's the first time that Madiba Day was celebrated without the anti-apartheid icon. Let's take a look at this clip.
I just want you to know, wherever Madiba is, whatever is the state in which he is in his new life, he is smiling.
All right, now, panel, your views. What are your views about the media coverage of this year's Nelson Mandela celebrations, Mello?
Well, I don't know. I'm very encouraged and I'm very upbeat and positive about the media coverage in general. I think Mandela Day has sort of become that feel-good type of day, the day where we celebrate our humanness and our humanity as South Africans. And I feel for me, like, I think the media did really come to the party. I mean, for example, you had some of the coverage, you had like, I think DJ Fresh does his Bikers for Charity type event. I mean, that I picked up that on the social media. I saw also the ministers when they were in Mahikeng in Northwest doing the cleanup event. I thought that was also covered. I saw in Drum Magazine also, they had some special about a charity event where celebrities were doing a cookout and that type of thing. So for me, I find that the media did outstanding and I'm very happy. I don't have anything to
complain about. Yeah. Ben?
I agree. I think it's a wonderful concept. I think the concept of giving back to society is a concept that must be enforced in our society. We only often focus on the negative, on the destructiveness of strikers, on the destructiveness of of people stealing infrastructure. And I think this is a way in which society can learn to give back and construct a society, and on a voluntary basis, not always doing something for what you get out of it.
In return. That seems to be the general outlook there, Ben. All right. Apparently, we have a tweet question. Let's see if we can put it up on our bright eye and see what some of you are asking us about, of course, the Nelson Mandela Day. Do we have the tweet? All right. They're still looking for it. All right. There it is. Did I miss what other countries were doing on Mandela Day? Seems our media didn't give much coverage on that part. Panel, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't know. I think in terms of mainstream media, I don't think there was much coverage, but I did pick it up on social media because, I mean, on Twitter, like some of the individual people from overseas and so on, I think they did celebrate Mandela Day.
I picked it up on the radio. I didn't have much opportunity to see it in the written media, but I saw it in the radio. I heard it in the radio. I heard that certain ministers were visiting hospitals, cleaning hospitals, and I think that is the kind of example we need in this country.
Now, the president also assigned a theme, of course, of cleaning up for Mandela. Do you think that the media really did drive upon that theme? What do you think, Ben?
No, as I've said, I think the media succeeded in driving that concept, and I think they did I think it's a beginning. And I think this has got to become something ingrained in our society. It's got to be a way of thinking, and the media can certainly help with that.
All right.
I think for me, just to add one more thing, in terms of the media driving it, I think also it is a bit contentious because South Africa is a very pluralist society, and everybody seems to have an opinion and a view about what they want to do and how they want to celebrate issues. So I think perhaps even though the president came out and the media did support him to some extent, people still felt that they wanted to contribute in their own way, in which they're entitled to, of course.
Well, if I can just quote here, the foundation is grateful for Mandela Day's good deeds. Apparently, Habitat for Humanity in South Africa built 67 houses in 1 week for the poor. And of course, more than 15,000 books were also donated to school libraries. And of course, more than 126 countries participated in Mandela Day. More than 1,200 positive deeds had been registered on their websites. What a success.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful. Good news. It's wonderful to have a good news story.
All right. And I think for a change, media could have, given us this in a more, this is a feel-good story. This is what happened on the day to, just to spur on that love for when it comes again next year.
No, absolutely. I mean, for me, I think one of the other things that you get, obviously, I mean, you get your cynics and your skeptics that are very nihilistic. They say no, but then this doesn't mean anything because it only happens for one day and so on. But for me, I think that's a very nihilistic attitude. I mean, we are humans. I mean, sometimes you just need that special day dedicated to such things to celebrate our humanness and our humanity. And I think this day provides us with such an opportunity and we should grab it with both hands.
All right. And that's where we leave it. And when we return, we're going to discuss the Marikana and arms deal commissions. Join the conversation by calling us on +2 711 714 6843, 714 6847 or 714 6857 rather. And let us know which stories anywhere you are you feel were not adequately covered by the media. Share your views and comments on Twitter at SA Media Monitor, and of course like our Facebook page. Don't go anywhere.
Across the globe, the continent and the entire country, every second there's always a breaking story. SABC News is your reliable eye, ear and information system in bringing you events as they happen. Our cutting-edge and hard-hitting journalism leaves no stone unturned, giving you the whole picture every time. Join us every day on SABC3 and know what is happening around you. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. You can be part of our discussion by calling us and sending us tweets. In our next story, the Farlam and Seriti commissions generated public interest when former President Thabo Mbeki and former Police Minister Nathi Mthethwa testified. Now, panel, let's welcome veteran South African journalist and, of course, Deputy Chair of Mr. South Africa, Mr. Raymond Lowe. Thank you so much for joining us.
Chairman.
All right, you're the chairman now. All right, Mr. Lowe, thank you so much for joining us. Your views on this?
Well, it's quite a staggering performance on, when was it, Friday, when the former president gave evidence. I thought that the session should have been postponed because of the unfortunate situation that developed around the attorney, Paul Hoffman. And he was obviously not in his, he said he was suffering from an overdose of drugs that he had to take because of the suicide of his daughter. And I think it would have been a very good idea to have postponed that session to enable him to have recovered his composure and be able to compose his questions with a degree of, shall we say, unemotional content. I didn't think, by the way, that the President helped the Commission at all. He didn't give any substantive information which was, I thought, of any value to the inquiry.
Now, panel, do you think that these commissions that have been invented, I mean, there's even the Lwandle Commission that is currently being imposed now, do you think that these commissions serve their purposes? Ben?
Well, I think in principle they're a good idea, but the fact that they go on almost indefinitely, and that and by the time, if there is going to be a pronouncement, it's irrelevant almost. I think they need to be time defined. But I just want to comment on what Raymond said about Paul Hoffman. I found it very unfortunate that he adopted such a haughty and high-handed approach in his questioning, cross-questioning of former President Mbeki. And I think Mbeki was correct in saying that this reminded him of the racist past of South Africa. And I agree that maybe he should have recused himself, or but it was very unfortunate.
Yes,
not
I
that
thought he should have
Mbeki
asked for a postponement.
Yeah, not that Mbeki helped matters, because he didn't really answer. And I think this clearly there is smoke here, and there is a fire that has caused the smoke, and we need to get to the bottom of this.
Well, we saw the better part of that commission in the beginning. It was about the line of questioning that was in question, and on whether the former president should be answering on which issues. And apparently Mr. Hoffman was alleging that he wasn't even briefed on the matters that he was testifying in. But did media have any part to play in clarifying for us, like, what these commissions are about? Melo?
I think for me it is a very interesting issue, Alicia, in terms of our level of tolerance for very small things, for minutiae, I suppose, and technical details. Because, I mean, if you look at the commission, especially the Seriti one, people weren't very much interested in it up until you had this drama of this advocate that broke down into tears because he had an interaction with the former president, President Mbeki. And I think also, if you compare it, for example, with also the Marikana Commission, the Marikana Commission also, people haven't really been paying that much attention. A lot of attention started getting paid to that commission when you started having the Mr. X testimony and sort of that sensational element about it. So I do think to some extent it does speak to the human condition in terms of we tend to become bored with technical details and minutiae, and we like I suppose, the glorious, sensationalized drama. In terms of the interaction between President Mbeki and the advocate Hoffman, I found that story to be quintessential of the South African story in terms of reconciliation and our story since '94. Because if you looked at it, I mean, the way whatever advocate Hoffman was questioning former President Thabo Mbeki, his tone, I mean, the things that he was saying, I mean, at one point, I mean, he told him that, no, he must cook up some story in his mind or whatever. And even me watching that thing, I cringed a little bit. And I thought to some extent, the way he was questioning the former president, impinged on the former president's dignity. And I think the former president was within his rights to respond in the manner that he responded. However, this speaks to our story as South African, the story of reconciliation, to the extent that there's a story on the other side also. The advocate Hoffman also, he had suffered some sort of trauma, some sort of tragedy, and that may also have spurred him to behave in the manner that he did.
But media does not pay attention to that. They just point out all the wrong things that were done. They're not being sympathetic to such issues, Melo.
Yeah, I suppose also it comes back to the whole sensational element. But I think at the end for me, like, I really enjoyed it because it all came together when the advocate apologized and the former president accepted the apology. And I thought that is a South African story to tell.
Unfortunately, we have to leave it there on this story. And when we return, we're going to look at the media coverage of the establishment of the BRICS Development Bank. You can still be part of our discussion by expressing your views as to which stories you think should have been covered by the media by calling us on +2711 714 6843, 714 6847 and 714 6857. Share your views and comments on Twitter at SA Media Monitor, as well as like our Facebook page. Stay with us. This is Media Monitor.
Accra is a beautiful city of contradictions.
Funerals in Ghana are colorful and flamboyant. Ghana coffins are functional coffins made by specialized carpenters. These colorful objects, which have developed out of figurative palanquins, are not only coffins but considered real works of art. Each year, festivals and durbars are held in various parts of the country to celebrate the heritage of the people.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays 5:30 p.m. on SABC News.
SABC, sharing 20 years of inspiration.
Welcome back to Media Monitor, and you can be part of our discussion by calling us on the numbers that appear at the bottom of your screens or contact us on Facebook and on Twitter. In our next story, leaders of BRICS countries have approved the creation of a new development bank, which will be a challenge to the World Bank and other similar agencies. Headquarters of the bank will be based in Shanghai, China, while the African Regional Center will be located right here in Johannesburg, South Africa. Let's take a look at this clip.
In the discussions, we finally all agreed that the headquarters should be in Shanghai, but Africa will have a regional center, which is going to be very active. I don't think, I thought at that point there was anything lost, because I thought this is, in a sense, we are trying to cut the cloth according to our sizes, all of us, because operating from Shanghai, it could look at all over, because we're not looking at Africa and Latin America only. It's going to be looking globally. And therefore, there are all the reasons why it should be there. But also, Africa need a bigger office.
Let me emphasize that our infrastructure challenges are enormous. No amount of instruments would actually be able to deal with that. And this is actually to complement. Of course, it might, in a way, be in competition, but my view is, and our view, a collective view, is that this will complement the existing instruments that we have in development institutions.
Now, the BRICS Head of States reached an agreement to establish the new development bank. What are your views, especially on the media coverage of this story?
Right on. For me, Alicia, I think the establishment of this BRICS Bank is a very positive thing, and I think it's a feather in the legacy of President Zuma, and I think it's something that he should be very proud of. But I am sorely disappointed in the media coverage of this entire event. I mean, the only reports that one got really was in terms of how much each of the countries contributed to this fund, and to that extent, South Africa was said to have contributed something like $10 billion US. I mean, for me, the things that I would love to cover, I would love the media to have covered, I'll state them, it's 5 issues. I think, firstly, $10 billion US is almost 100 billion rands. That is a lot of money. For me, the one question that I would expect the media to cover and to ask is, where is President Zuma getting this money from? Where is the South African government getting 100 billion rands from? I mean, South Africa is already running a budget deficit, and we have to supplement that with a borrowing such that we can square off our budget. And then the structural budget deficit that we're running has led to a high amount of accumulated debt that we have in South Africa. So where are we getting 100 billion rand from? That's question number 1. Question number 2, parliamentary oversight. I mean, obviously the president is mandated to do foreign policy for the country and so on. But then I haven't heard no discussion happening in Parliament about whether or not Parliament accepts this deal. whether Parliament accepts that President Zuma must go or the government must go and spend 100 billion in a development bank. For me, I would have loved to questions being asked in terms of what is the role of Parliament in South Africa. And I can give you an example with the United States, for example. I mean, after World War I, you had President Woodrow Wilson. I think he formed the League of Nations. That was a precursor to the United Nations. And then what he did is that he got there in Europe and he agreed with all the presidents and they decided to form the structure. When he went back to the US Congress refused the United States to join that thing. So essentially that structure collapsed. So for me, the question that I'm asking is, where's that parliamentary oversight in being able to attend to these things?
The where's third question, media in covering all of that?
Exactly. I've got two more questions. Yes, the third question that I'd like addressed is in terms of what is the role of this bank vis-a-vis what the World Bank is currently doing? Because for me, I mean, developing nations have been complaining about conditions that have been imposed on them by the World Bank in these neoliberal conditions, such that subsidies, issues on tariffs, issues on a free-floating exchange rate, and so on. And then those questions, they're not being asked in the media. The fourth issue that I would have liked covered is...
All right.
Just one more issue.
Okay, Melo.
The fourth issue I would have loved covered is the issue of how this thing now impacts in terms of the global geopolitics, in terms of, like, now that we have this structure that is a BRICS formation that was just a talk shop, now that's graduated into something with concrete programs. How does that affect global relations?
Melo, before that even gets there, they need to clarify, the media, to the people, what is this BRICS group all about and what this bank is going to do in terms of being an infrastructure funding bank. All right, now we are joined on the line by Mr. Abdullah Verashia, co-founder and partner at leading emerging market consultancy. So a very good morning to you and thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Pleasure to be with you.
Now, Abdullah, what does the establishment of the bank mean to members of BRICS? Will it help grow the economy, especially for South Africa?
I mean, of course, I think it's unprecedented within the global economy, and the decision that was taken at Fortaleza is really seen as a countermeasure to some of the Western financial institutions. And really, a number of finance ministers and commerce ministers from the various BRICS countries have spoken about this as being the new IMF or the mini IMF. It's obviously early days, and I often say that it's not as if, Cinderella puts on a shoe and all of a sudden at midnight in Fortaleza, we have this new development bank. The new development bank will take about 2 to 2.5 years to be established into a proper bricks and mortar institution. But I think it is reflective of the changing nature of the global economy. And I think this is unprecedented for South Africa. I think one of the panelists spoke about the fact that, how does South Africa manage to position $10 billion? And I think there's a few underlying issues behind that. I think firstly, when we see the formation of new structures and new multilateral institutions, the initial structure is critical. And South Africa has committed the $10 billion because they wanted to have an equal contribution to the other 4 member states, Brazil, China, Russia, and India. Because if you give an equal contribution at the onset and at the beginning, you have an equal say at the dinner table. And so it was important to do that. I think the other important part is that the BRICS Development Bank, or this new development bank as it's now known, has to go through and has to be enacted in domestic legislation. And so every one of the 5 legislatures in all 5 countries will have to enact this in terms of their domestic legislation. It's critical and it's important, and it's actually necessary in all 5 countries. I think what I like and what's important for me is that this new development bank provides an opportunity for the 5 countries to start creating the requisite institutional structure around this BRICS grouping and to provide the requisite financing towards infrastructure projects. And many economic analysts have been saying that $50 billion is relatively small in terms of the global financial architecture. But what we must realize is that the $50 billion and the new development bank provides an opportunity for co-financing of other financial institutions and gives them a measure of comfort.
Abdullah?
And so
Abdullah, just very quickly, we've got a question coming through right here in our studios from Twitter, from Tabiso Chabalala. Says, what's our buy-in? Can we afford it, or are we going to borrow capital?
Well, I think that, what came out of the BRICS summit was an instruction by the heads of state to all of the 5 finance ministers to be able to look at the mechanization of this BRICS Development Bank. And so what will happen now is the finance ministers of each of the countries will go and look at as to where this $10 billion comes from the corpus. It will be in $2.5 billion every year for the next 6 years, and that's how the money is going to be put together by each of the countries. But I think the countries will now look at their domestic financial situation. For China, it's very easy to take $10 billion. They've got a foreign exchange reserve of over $3 trillion. For South Africa, it's more difficult. It's a sizable part of our GDP. But I think, it's important that we look at the spend that we're putting together here from a long-term perspective, and we put it into perspective in terms of South Africa's geopolitical engagement on the continent. If we want to play quite a key and critical role in Africa, it's important that we take the leadership mantle in terms of addressing some of the critical issues in Africa. And according to the World Bank, Africa needs $95 billion in infrastructure every year for the next 10 years. And so the focus of the new development bank will be on infrastructure development. And because we've now managed to negotiate the headquarters of the regional center, we'll be at the focal point of ensuring that infrastructure is spent in Africa. What will that mean for us as a country? Well, one, it will open up significant opportunities for many South African companies, because the challenge for South African companies has been the lack of infrastructure on the continent to be able to transport goods and services. And once we've got the requisite financing of infrastructure, it opens up a multitude of opportunities for various companies, and it increases inter-regional trade in Africa.
Mr. Varasha.
So I think it's not without criticism, but I think we must look at the significant benefits of the new development bank as well.
Mr. Varasha, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you. Appreciate
All right, that was Mr. Abdullah Varasha, partner and co-founder at leading emerging market consultancy, talking to us about the highly anticipated BRICS Bank to be built in Shanghai for the BRICS group, of which, of course, South Africa is a member in our panel. What are your views about this? Raymond, I want to hear your views.
Well, there's no doubt about it, as our colleague here has mentioned, that that where is the money to come from? And quite rightly you said that there was no prior discussion of the amount of money or whether South Africa should in fact be involved in the bank to that extent. And I think that's a serious deficiency on the part of our government. But then it's in line with what the government normally does, which is to go about doing things without consulting anybody. And in this case, not consulting Parliament.
But I think the media should have also stepped into that.
I agree with you that the media has been rather lax
That's what we want to find out. Where is the media lacking?
Well, it hasn't gone into this question as deeply as it should have.
Absolutely.
That's the lack.
You find the story in the economic side of the story. Ben?
Okay, on the media side, I believe the media hasn't focused on the mandate of this bank, what it's supposed to do. And I think as South Africans, we're going to be a bit disappointed in what the bank is capable of doing and will do. We will play a relatively small part in this. Africa has huge infrastructural needs, but so does South America. And Brazil is a player there, and they'll be looking after their own backyard. There are Asian needs as well. And so we are still very, very small. The president of the bank, the next two presidents will not be a South African. The bank is positioned in Shanghai. And I think we have our own development bank. And this may just be yet another bank. And with no one knowing quite sure what it's going to be doing.
We want media to clarify that.
Yeah, we need to clarify that.
Absolutely. But before you answer that, Meda, let me just take Morgan Pasha's comment here. It says, no media in South Africa can expose dollar-backed IMF's reform policies dictated to borrowers. It's a dollar agenda.
Yeah, for me, I think that issue in the tweet there speaks to the issue that we talk of in the structural arrangement in the media industry in South Africa. The fact that we depend on foreign media coverage for stories that happen abroad, that we do not have foreign correspondents. And I think that is reflected also in some of the BRICS coverage, because obviously the international media houses, I do not think their politics permit them to really go in depth into the story. I think that lack of coverage then reflects locally, because then we do not have that coverage from our own journalists in the country.
But I just want to say that basically I don't think this bank will have its own agenda. And and like the IMF, they're also going to have criteria. And it's what is going to be the difference between the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank and this bank?
We want media to explain
because China is really the dominant player here. And already China are the dominant contributor to investment into
bank,
Africa.
yes.
So how is this going to, what is the interplay of all these forces?
I'd like to hear all of that from media, but Melo, unfortunately, we have to go to an ad break. But stay tuned, because when we return, we'll be discussing the coverage of the ongoing conflict in Gaza and, of course, the dwindling coverage of the Bring Back Our Girls campaign. You can still call us on +2 711 714 6847, 714 6843, 714 6857. Share your views and comments on Twitter at SA Media Monitor as well as on Facebook. We'll be back shortly after this.
Dumelang Kunjani Nda Assalamualaikum Goeiemorgen Namaste Jumbo Africa, and a very warm welcome to SABC News Channel 404. South African Revenue Service has upheld its impressive record of collecting taxes. SARS collected about 86 billion rand more in the fiscal year compared to the previous year.
The message we want to communicate is that government must also live modestly, and that when we're looking at these sorts of issues, modesty is an important message to communicate to the public.
That's AM News, daily at 10 a.m. on SABC News.
SABC, sharing 20 years of inspiration.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor right here on the SABC News channel. Remember, you can be part of our discussion by calling us and sending us tweets. In our next story now, the pro-Palestinians marched to the Israeli embassy's trade office in Sandton, demanding the expulsion of Israel ambassador following the ongoing attacks on Gaza. However, Israel has expanded its attacks on Palestine. This is what President Jacob Zuma had to say about the Gaza situation.
The issue of Palestine and Israel, it has to come to an end. It's actually an embarrassing thing globally that at today's world, when we have gone through the last World War, when we have established very powerful international organizations to help resolve issues, there is an issue that is unresolvable. It's actually a difficult thing. Why should we? Why should we have people dying, innocent souls, children and women, in this day and age, when we say we don't want people to die for sweet nothing?
Now, panel, the situation in Gaza is absolutely horrific. What are your views on the local and international coverage? Ben, let's start with you.
The situation in Gaza is not only in Gaza that it's awful. It's awful in Israel as well. Life cannot go on. People cannot go to work. People cannot move around. And every one of those missiles is a war crime. Every one of those missiles, what some people say, describe as shrapnel, but every one of them can do huge damage, and every one of them is aimed at civilian populations and cities. And that must be, it's not a scorecard that we're keeping here. It's not a game of soccer or football game in which we are counting, the number of deaths on one side and another. This is a human tragedy, and it's being driven by a genocidal regime that basically does not only not recognize Israel, but wants to wipe it off the face of the earth and wants to kill every Jew that lives there. And I think, these people that call for the ambassador of Israel to be sent back home are basically being hypocritical and are being untruthful and disingenuous, because basically every day in Syria, every day in Iraq, more people are dying, and on our own continent with Boko Haram, these kind of tragedies are being perpetrated every day by jihadist groups.
I think this issue is very interesting. I mean, like this week we had the passing of Nadine Gordimer. And for me, one of the things that came up with Nadine Gordimer is during the time of apartheid, when it was very unpopular, I think, to join the ANC, she joined the ANC and she started making pronouncements in terms of how she felt the system was unjust, the system was brutal, and the system tended to oppress people. And obviously people have drawn parallels between what happened then in South Africa and what is happening now between the Israel and Palestine issue. So for me, I think the issue, maybe we can also take a lesson and heed some of the actions of people like Nadine Gordimer to be able to look at the situation in depth, to be able to come out and say, but isn't there a structural imbalance there? I mean, for example, on the one side, there's suffering on the Israeli side, there's suffering on the Palestine side, but you also have the US then now subsidizing the arms of Israel. Now Israel has like this massive defense force, and then they also now fighting against the Palestinians. I mean, always the issue of Palestine is also very complex because you get the Gaza issue, then you get the West Bank issue, then you get the Golan Heights issue. So it is very complex, but then I do think for me, there is a level of systemic injustice that's going on in that country, and I do feel that the media does not really cover that. And I think this also comes back to the issue of foreign correspondence, because international media houses tend to be very much aligned to the hegemonic Western structures in terms of reporting what is going on. And then the Western countries, I think they're very much pro-Israel. So I do think that Palestine's cause also tends to get marginalized. Because, for example, there was, I think, a march in the UK yesterday where people were having a pro-Palestine march, and the BBC, I do not think they really covered that march and gave it as much prominence as it should have had.
Let's hear from the chairman.
Well, well, I concur with my friend over here. The one thing that, in fact, has not been reported to any large extent has been the fact that Hamas has threatened to eliminate Israel. That is the starting point of this whole confrontation between the two states, is Hamas wants to eliminate Israel. How can you negotiate anything with a movement, with a government that, in fact, will not tolerate you? It says you should be exterminated. All your people should be exterminated. And I think that that element of this whole controversy has not been highlighted as much as it should have been. I don't go along with the Israeli response, because I think they should be taking some care to ensure that children and civilians and non-combatants are not injured. But one understands their difficulty, particularly when Hamas uses innocent people as shields against attack. I think that there's a huge imbalance in the reporting of what is going on there, and very little attempt to try and get some sort of a process going whereby these two countries can be brought around a table to, in fact, discuss the issues candidly and honestly, and they're not doing that.
I think for me, just one more issue, Ali. I think in terms of the issue that Raymond has raised now, in terms of that Hamas has threatened to eliminate Israel, I think for me it's very instructive also to look at our own history. I mean, there was a point where the nationalist government was also saying that the ANC is threatening to eliminate the South African white minority rule. The ANC is threatening to destabilize the country. And that's why we had situations where you had the war in Angola where they sent the defense force, and then there was all of that fighting. So I think this issue, there is suffering on both sides, but also the media coverage, I don't think it's helping, because it's very much slanted to one side. And I do feel that the media tends to be very much pro-Israeli. And then South African media, because of our dependence on the international media houses, I think we do tend to become burdened with the politics of the international media houses.
Shouldn't we make our own decisions and choices there, Ben?
Sure. First of all, I disagree with the fact that our media is pro-Israel.
I agree with you on that.
Yeah. I mean, and there's also this myth that the media is controlled by Jews. And there is not one media house in South Africa that is controlled by Jews. So I just want to make the point as well about aid, U.S. aid. The Palestinians have received over $50 billion of aid, more than any other people. And this refugee problem is being extenuated and given life by this aid. Instead of building shelters for their people, instead of looking after their people, they build tunnels with which they're offensive tunnels with which to attack Israel. Why does Hamas and why do the Palestinian authorities not build shelters for their own people so that these deaths of innocent people and women will not occur?
I think also one more issue that I can add there also. Obviously, this issue is very contentious to that extent. I think that you also have to look at in terms of how much aid the U.S. is giving to Israel. I mean, I read some of the statistics that the amount of cumulative debt financing that the US has provided is almost close to $1 trillion now. So obviously, I think there is some sort of subsidization on both sides. I think the other issue that we have to look at in terms of the Palestine-Israel conflict is the fact that this issue has been going on over a long time. I mean, if you had looked back to the 1967 Six-Day War, where Israel now started changing the border structure between Palestine and themselves, and then the Palestinians had a smaller land area to occupy. And I think also you can go back to the 1947, where you had the Green Line, I think, border structure that you had. So this issue has been ongoing, and then I think people on both sides, they do have valid moral claims to be making on why their cause is just. But I do not condone, I think, the killing and thinking that you're going to solve anything by killing. I think these people need to come around the table and start to thresh out some of these issues which seem very much intractable.
That's what media should be throwing at all those people in Palestine.
Well,
the
interesting fact about
very
what you were
quickly,
saying,
Raymond, very quickly.
Yes, is the fact that there is a strong body of opinion in Israel itself that is very concerned with the way the Israelis are responding to these attacks. And you don't have that in Palestine.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, and that's where we leave it on that topic, gentlemen. All right, and we move on to our next story now. President Goodluck Jonathan cancelled meeting with parents of abducted girls in Nigeria. It's been 3 months, and the campaign of Bring Back Our Girls continues to receive less media coverage. Now, panel, why is this campaign gaining so little media coverage, especially at such a critical stage? I mean, we've heard about people escaping. No probe has been made to say, well, the people that have escaped, have they been assisting in government in terms of trying to find these girls? Ben, let's start with you.
Okay, so I think the chance of finding these girls now is very remote. They've been scuttled over the borders, and they've been sold off as chattels and as prostitutes and who knows what. So this is just part of the trade in human trafficking that's going on all across Africa. And I think that the media is very wanton in actually not focusing on this. There is a huge trade across Sudan. There's a huge trade of human beings, and this needs to be focused on. And this, what is happening in Nigeria, whole swathes of northern Nigeria have been burnt to cinders by Islamic fundamentalists. People who have who just have an agenda of destroying anything Western and any institutionalized form of living. And this needs to be focused on the destructiveness of these people. And Africa has realized at the last African Union how important this challenge is to Africa. And if we don't stem the tide now, it's going to start creeping in and seeping into the rest of Africa and will affect us as well in South Africa.
I think for me, an interesting issue there with the Nigerian issue of Boko Haram, I think people have tended to deal with terrorists and treat them as irrational agents, as people who do not have focused programs and plans on how to achieve their goals and means. And I think that type of analysis and that type of thinking sometimes also crops up in our media, I think affects the way we are able to view and analyze the situation. I mean, for example, I think if you were to start from a perspective that some of these guys, be they fundamentalists or not, are actually very rational, then you start worrying about issues about, obviously these guys need to recruit people. They need all these videos that they're putting out. It's advertising that they need to be posting out, all of these structures that they need to be establishing, they need funding for that, they need arms for that. So I think we also need to start treating these guys as rational agents and then start focusing on how is it that we can interrupt the activities from that perspective. So I do agree that, I mean, obviously there's a problem emerging there in the Northern African belt, especially with all of this conflict, and that type of situation, I think also needs some sort of political intervention.
All right.
Are you suggesting that Boko Haram is a rational agency?
I think that there's a difference. There's a difference between being rational and there's a difference, I think, between being civil. I do not necessarily think that they're civil and then their ways of doing things are progressive, but I do think to some extent in what they're doing, there's a calculation that they're making that if we do this, then we'll get that. It may not be the smartest form.
What is it that they want?
All right, let me take a caller very quickly. James from Leondale, a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. Your comment, please.
Yeah, morning. I'm also watching the SABC News, but now I have a question to the gentleman, I think the media analyst, is it Mr. Levitas?
Yes.
Yeah, earlier on he touched on the Israel issue, the Gaza saga.
Right.
But now, you just start, but now I want to understand what is the real problem in Israel? Because this, I think it's quite some time now. It's almost a decade. So I just wonder if you could just allude to the actual problem in Israel.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, James, for your call.
Yeah. So the real problem basically is that you have two people struggling, two nationalists struggling for the same territory. And Israel has agreed on several occasions to divide the land. In 1947, at Resolution 181, there was an attempt, and Israel accepted the division of the land. It was more or less 50-50. The Arab states have never been able to come to terms with recognizing Israel. The only two Arab states that have actually done so are Jordan and Egypt. And this is essentially the problem, that the Arab states cannot get their heads around living side by side with an independent Jewish state. And I think that part of the problem is that in the history of Islam, there has never been a Jewish state. And this requires a quantum leap for them to come to terms with the existence of a Jewish state. And that is the basic problem. Hamas is completely motivated by the complete destruction. They see Tel Aviv, they see Haifa, which are an integral part of Israel. They see those cities as being Palestinian cities. And as long as they don't accept Israel's right to exist, there will never be peace.
Ben, thank you so much for clarifying that to us. I mean, a lot of people think, they associate this war into days back since Holocaust. And no, media hasn't really gone into explaining what this lifelong feud between these two actually is. Very quickly, Melo, very quickly.
No, I agree with the point that you're making, Alicia, because, ever since, for me, I knew that there was something called television. This conflict has been on. So you tended to become very much fatigued before you actually got the intellectual maturity to actually ask, what are these people fighting about? And the media, I think, at some point, maybe they just need to do an Israel-Palestine 101, where they explain to us what is actually going on there.
Well, there we go. That's something that we're asking our media. Let's now move back to another saga, of course, the Boko Haram saga. On the line, we are now joined by Mr. Ibrahim Dean, a researcher from Afro-Middle East Center, who will be giving us some insight into the Boko Haram saga. Ibrahim, a very good morning to you, and thank you for joining us on the show this morning.
Hi, Alicia. Thanks for having me on.
Now, Ibrahim, do you think that the media has done enough to explain or even find out what Boko Haram is, their history, who funds them, etc.?
If you look at the other guests' comments who clearly lack the understanding of what's going on in northern Nigeria and just blame everything on militant Islam, you can already see that the media hasn't done enough to understand Boko Haram. They have not done enough to contextualize the situation to see what's the cause of Boko Haram. And the cause of Boko Haram is not Islamic fundamentalism, but is actually corruption, endemic poverty, lack of education in the northeastern Nigerian states. And, good luck on the response. However, unfortunately, the media just looks at what story will sell papers, what story will make headlines, and you then look at that and then respond to that. And until the circumstances which breed, these people taking up such militant activities are not dealt with, Boko Haram will can be cut out, but it will be replaced by some institution that may do it even worse. So, we saw MEND in the southeast, in the north, south of the country, the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta. Everyone viewed it as a militant organization who acted very irrationally and who had no, proper motives. And we then saw, the Nigerians establish a South Delta Forum in the south of the country. We saw oil revenue being spread more equally, and we now see MEND actually, incorporate itself into, the south and is no longer militant and no longer active there. So I think the media has not contextualized, the Boko Haram crisis enough. And I think other issues, have swayed coverage. For example, the Israel-Palestine conflict, which unfortunately your guest talks about UN Resolution 181, but forgets the Saudi Peace Initiative in 2002. He forgets UN Resolution 194. The crisis in Ukraine.
All right.
And these things have in media
All right,
then
Ibrahim.
we have to look at incentives.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim. Ibrahim Din, of course, is a researcher at Afro Middle East. And, of course, that was his account and unpacking really the saga as to what Boko Haram is. Now, panel, what stories do you think will be making headlines this week? I want to hear from you. Let's start with you, Ben.
I think the Gaza conflict will be continuing. I think
Very
we need
quickly.
to, and hopefully there will be a call for a ceasefire, and the killing will stop. I think we need to get to the bottom of what we need to get to the bottom of what happened with the jet being shot down.
All right.
I think that will make it.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, gentlemen, and we're going to have to leave it there. But nonetheless, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this morning. Our viewers' contributions and suggestions is highly valued. Remember, you can email us your views about the show at mediamonitor@sabc.co.za. Share your views and comments on Facebook. Go to www.facebook.com/MediaMonitor and like our page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SA Media Monitor. And thank you so much for watching us today. Join us again next week right here on SABC News. It's all local, all global, and all the time. And in case you missed our live show, remember you can still catch the repeat Monday morning at 2 a.m. For myself, Alicia Jali, the team, and the rest of the QTIV team. You have yourself a blessed Sunday. Goodbye.
Into Africa. This is the Kingdom of Lesotho. The leader is King Letsie III. The Kingdom of Lesotho attained full independence on 4th October in 1966. The population is more than 2 million people. One of the major languages spoken is English. Monetary unit is Maluti.
Good evening and welcome to yet another edition of Sports Live, the show that brings you the latest local and international news, live interviews with the who's who in sport. He's the first South African to wear a yellow jersey that was at the Tour de France this year.
It's the first time that we get a boxer who's recognized by the Ring magazine as the best fighter in the planet to visit our country.
And he's very close to world record pace. And in fact, it is a new world record.
When you cross the line, what went through one's mind?
None of the four of us knew who had won. The scoreboard is always on the left, but all of us tend to the right. No, we just waited for the country to go down. RSA.
That's Sports Live, daily at 8:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Goeienaand en baie welkom by die weeruitsending. 'n Frontale stelsel het vandag deurbeweeg tot hier in die noordoostelike dele. 'n Tweede koue front het hier oor die suidweste inbeweeg. Vogtige lugsirkulasie in 'n groot gebied hier in die suidweste en ook in die oostelike dele. En 'n koue reënweer word vannag vir die Noord- en die Wes-Kaap voorspel.
Zoom into Africa. This is Mali. The president is Mr. Ibrahim Boubacar Keita. Mali got independent from France on 20 June in 1960. The population is more than 16 million people. One of Mali's major languages spoken is Arabic. Monetary unit is CFA.
Habab Shikwani is a man who I would say perhaps is born an entrepreneur. A man who always wants to see himself going forward. A man who is never satisfied with what he has achieved. That is Habab Shikwani.
Kore gauti ke motho ma fulufulu. Wa sanya ke ngala robala. Ko le sentse le ga le shoma le shome le golofele le tishe. And go rena ga itshimele go shoma o shoma le lena mo kareng ke mo shumi le ena.
Well, what actually prompted me to go into this is just one thing. I wanted to make a good living. I think that is what pushes everybody into working, to make a good living and to make a success of what you are doing, to ensure your future. Well, I feel that you cannot enjoy the success of your business if your workers are not happy. Work depends on a team, and the workers that work for me are part of my job and part of my activity in every sense. They must be happy if I've got to make a success. That is my belief. As I say, I'm fired with that spirit or patriotism, the feeling for my country, my people, that comes from as far back as when I was in political organizations. That made me feel that South Africa cannot be anything if we don't work hard, if we don't apply ourselves, blacks like other nations. So that's why I work hard. We are now at the point where we have acquired more sophisticated machinery for manufacturing, and we are becoming more capital intensive in a way because we have acquired big machinery that could generate more work and more profit. This time I learned that when I bought this sophisticated machinery, I had to send people for training. I've just sent 2 electricians for training to West Australia, Perth, West Australia, where they were trained to man the machine that I bought.
Tolagi kopale lindate Shikwani. Wila ronar nos unyaga ora kamchini wa go dira frame Australia. Ke ga re gonare o senjore na ke tsamaele na nkishe mo Australia go bona motšhini o le go ruta go operate. Ke re tsamaya mo re ya re tsamaile mo ka di 5 ile mo gibelo ra John Smart re namela airplane ra ya Australia.
Today, when you look out, you will see progress everywhere, and people are flocking to the